What does it mean, that symbolic, significant vote in the House of Lords?
So this particular vote isn't necessarily going to change the policy, but it does open the doors to changes further down the line. So the government's sort of official line, the response to this is that this amendment, because it was quite sort of loosely written, the government reckons they can basically shrug it off. But, you know, the size of the defeat certainly sort of opens the door to not only when the bill goes back to the Commons, but there's another amendment in the Commons which still hasn't been debated or voted on, which has much tougher language about staying in the customs union.
And there are 10 Tories who back it, don't there?
Exactly. Yeah. So basically we're looking at, you know, probably around sort of early summer is when we could see another showdown about the customs union, and at that point there would be a lot more at stake.
First day of the proper Brexit discussions took place yesterday. Anything happened? Have we made progress? Have we signed a trade deal yet or not?
So Ian, our colleague in Brussels, what he's reporting is that the EU just talked through their guidelines. Do you remember the guidelines that the EU published, sort of setting out basically a basic free trade agreement? Doesn't do much for services, very clear that banks aren't going to, you know, get the access that they want. And so the EU just sort of talked through what those guidelines are. And, of course, it was the interesting thing is that, you know, there were 3 days of talks this week. First 2 days were about divorce issues, and the third day there was a meeting on Northern Ireland, and only then after that there was a meeting on the future relationship. So not a huge amount of ground.
And Emma, I enjoyed reading your Brexit bulletin today on the Tube. I read lots today on the Tube. And another red line phase. Is the government changing its tune when it comes to immigration?
There does seem to be a bit of a softening. So if you compare the rhetoric, you know, I suppose the first indication of it was in the Mansion House speech on the 2nd of March, and May then said, you know, UK citizens will still want to work and study in the EU and vice versa. And she repeated that on one of her recent trips. She repeated that. David Davis recently, again, a Brexiteer, said recently that the policy would be freedom of movement of brains. Now, not brawn, but brains. And I think, you know, that's kind of interesting. And then, of course, we have Boris Johnson today in the Telegraph saying that Brexit wasn't about, you know, slashing immigration, and he sort of defines his position as quite liberal. Of course, Boris has always been liberal on immigration, but there does seem to be just a bit of a softening in the tone when it comes to immigration, and a bit of a contrast from, you know, in the early days in 2016. I think that this government was very quick to come out and say it was all about immigration.